Agatha Raisin and Bill Wong's Secret Visitor. Good evening and welcome, dear friends. A shadow moves across the Wong-Hamley estate just as dusk falls, leaving Bill Wong unnervingly tense. Agatha Raisin, observing quietly from her favorite garden bench, senses something amiss. A visitor has arrived, unexpected, secretive, and unsettling. What truth lurks behind the closed doors, and can Agatha uncover it before it's too late? Before Agatha steps into today's mystery, we'd love to know something special from you. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments remind us how far these little village tales can travel and how close they bring us all. And if these stories bring you comfort, do subscribe so you never miss a gentle moment with Agatha. So, let's begin.
Chapter 1. The Unexpected Guest. Agatha Raisin's evening stroll had become something of a ritual, a gentle ritual that allowed her to survey the village in the golden hush between day and night. The street lamps had flickered to life, casting soft pools of light over the cobblestones, and the faint scent of burning logs drifted from the chimneys like a promise of warmth. She had almost passed the Wong residence, her thoughts wandering to a particularly stubborn crossword puzzle, when movement caught her sharp eyes. Bill Wong's front door, usually closed and unremarkable, was ajar. A tall figure lingered just beyond the threshold, shoulders hunched against a sudden evening chill. Agatha's curiosity pricked. She slowed her pace, pretending to adjust her scarf while her mind catalogued possibilities. Visitors were rare at Bill's, an especially disciplined man in a village where everyone knew everyone else's business rarely welcomed unexpected company. And yet, here stood someone clearly out of place. She noted the figure's odd posture, a kind of stiffness that seemed both intentional and anxious. The visitor's coat was too heavy for the mild autumn evening, and gloves, black and immaculate, hinted at fastidiousness, or perhaps an attempt to conceal something. Her fingers itched to investigate further, but she maintained the casual nonchalance of a passerby. From behind a neatly trimmed hedge, she could see Bill moving inside, his usually confident gait slightly hesitant. His eyes darted toward the door and then to a small cabinet by the hallway, the way someone checks a lock or a secret. A sharp, deliberate knock echoed through the quiet street, reverberating against the brick walls. Agatha's heart ticked a little faster, a thrill running down her spine. That knock was deliberate, polite, yet commanding, a herald of disruption. The visitor waited, and Bill's hand trembled ever so slightly as it hovered near the door handle. Finally, with a visible swallow, he opened the door. Words passed between them, too soft for Agatha to catch, but their expressions told a story all on their own. Bill's face, usually composed and imperturbable, flickered with tension. The visitor's smile was faint, almost imperceptible, and yet it carried a peculiar weight, as though harboring secrets better left unspoken. Agatha couldn't help but take a step closer, feigning an interest in the late-blooming roses along the hedge. She heard snippets of the conversation now, fragments of unusual phrases. Long overdue, must be discreet, not what you expected. Each word wrapped around her curiosity like a ribbon. Who was this visitor? And what connection could they possibly have to Bill Wong? The village itself seemed to lean in, its ordinary tranquility now punctuated with an undercurrent of tension. From across the street, Mrs. Pritchard, ever alert to oddities, leaned from her window and murmured to her cat, "I never saw him before. Strange visitor at Bill's at this hour." Agatha filed the information, noting the tiny ways gossip traveled in Carsley, always winding around the edges of truth. A feeling of anticipation hung in the crisp air, mingling with the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. She could sense the narrative forming, like a puzzle whose pieces were scattered just beyond her reach. The visitor lingered. shifting from one foot to another, and Bill's posture stiffened further. Agatha's mind raced with possibilities. A long-lost relative, a business associate with urgent news, or perhaps someone carrying grudges from a past incident. The tension between the two was subtle, yet undeniable, and it drew her in like a moth to a flickering lamp. Even as she considered retreating, she found herself rooted to the spot, observing the unfolding scene with a mixture of amusement and fascination. Eventually, the visitor stepped inside, and Bill closed the door behind them with careful precision. Agatha straightened, her pulse still lingering in a state of mild excitement. The quiet of the street returned, but the sense of something shifted, something unspoken remained. Her evening walk had promised only the comfort of familiar sights, yet now the village felt charged with possibility. Agatha's curiosity was fully awake. The evening had transformed into the opening act of a story that demanded attention. With a quiet sigh, she adjusted her coat and continued along the path. The image of that visitor and Bill's uneasy expression etched firmly into her mind.
Agatha trailed the Wong estate at a discreet distance, her footsteps muted against the gravel path. She didn't intend to be nosy, well, perhaps a little, but her curiosity was a trait that had served her admirably over the years. The visitor, now visible through the warm glow of the front hall window, moved with an odd precision, almost rehearsed, as though every gesture had been carefully measured. Agatha tilted her head, mentally cataloging the peculiarities. First, there was the matter of the gloves. They remained on indoors, even when the visitor handled objects. Not that Agatha could see exactly what was being touched, but the sight alone suggested either fastidious caution or secretive intentions. She made a mental note. Gloves indoors. Very interesting. Could be germ-conscious or concealing fingerprints. Must remember. Her lips twitched in amusement. She always found the notion of adults hiding things with such exaggerated subtlety quietly entertaining. Next, she noticed the visitor's interaction with Bill. Bill, normally composed and precise, was fidgeting with a small silver pen on his desk, a nervous tic Agatha hadn't seen in years. The visitor leaned slightly forward when speaking, tilting their head in a way that suggested both politeness and a keen awareness of authority. Yet there was a hesitancy, a pause before each word, that made Agatha's curiosity tingle. Something wasn't lining up. Either this person was inexperienced in handling delicate matters, or they were hiding a truth that needed careful guarding. She moved a little closer behind the privacy of a tall laurel hedge, adjusting her scarf to peek from different angles. The visitor shifted suddenly, glancing toward the window where Agatha suspected she was unseen but could easily be glimpsed. A small thrill ran through her. The subtle tension of nearly being discovered was part of the charm of these investigations. Agatha's internal monologue ran in its usual playful cadence. Dear visitor, you may think yourself inconspicuous, but I have eyes sharper than you suspect, and a nose for oddities. Her attention was drawn to a brief, unexplained movement. The visitor had set a small leather-bound notebook on the desk, only to retrieve it moments later, scanning the pages with a quick, almost anxious glance before returning it to a drawer. Agatha squinted. There was no hasty writing, no visible exchange of items, yet the gesture had purpose. Something worth hiding, perhaps, she mused silently. Each minor inconsistency became a breadcrumb leading toward a pattern, a puzzle she instinctively knew she could assemble before anyone else even realized it existed. Outside, the evening had deepened. Shadows pooled under the trees, and the faint rustle of leaves carried the occasional sound of a distant dog barking. The cozy tranquility of Carsley made the subtle drama inside the Wong estate all the more pronounced. Agatha appreciated the contrast. The village's calm, the visitor's deliberate tension, and Bill's contained anxiety, a trifecta that made her detective instincts hum with satisfaction. As she continued to observe, a whisper of conversation reached her from the open window. Words, nearly drowned by the gentle ticking of a wall clock, included phrases like unexpected arrival and must proceed cautiously. Agatha's eyes sparkled with quiet delight. There it was again, the tantalizing hint that not everything was as it seemed. She jotted a note in her mind. unexpected arrival must proceed cautiously, likely hiding more than a suitcase. By now, she had constructed a small mental map of the room's activity, the visitor's position, Bill's subtle reactions, and the odd choreography of gestures that suggested underlying tension. Each observation added to a tapestry of suspicion that was delicate and compelling. Agatha smiled to herself, feeling the familiar thrill of a mystery gently unfurling before her eyes. She had no intention of barging in, but she was gathering clues, mentally assembling pieces of a puzzle that promised to reveal more than the visitor, or even Bill, might anticipate. Finally, the visitor moved toward the front door once more. Agatha took a step back, allowing herself a long, deliberate exhale. Her curiosity had been sated only partially, and that was precisely how she liked it. There were enough anomalies to chew over, enough mysteries to ponder, and the evening had transformed into a quiet prelude for discoveries yet to come. With a faint smile and a last glance at the softly lit window, she retreated into the shadows, her mind already buzzing with theories and possibilities.
Chapter 2. Secrets Behind Closed Doors. Agatha perched herself behind the neatly trimmed hedge near the side of the Wong house, her eyes narrowing with the practiced focus of someone who had seen one too many mysteries unfold in Carsley. From this vantage point, the window offered just enough of a view to catch the subtle exchanges between Bill and his unexpected visitor. They were speaking in hushed tones, voices low but urgent, carrying a cadence that suggested more was being communicated in pauses than in words. Bill's posture was rigid, his hands clasped tightly on the edge of the desk. The visitor leaned slightly forward, voice calm yet insistent, occasionally gesturing to emphasize a point. Agatha tilted her head, noting the tension threading through each gesture. There was a certain elegance to their disagreement, a sort of polite friction that hinted at underlying resentment. The phrases she caught were tantalizingly vague. "You should have told me sooner," "It's not as simple as it seems," "Some things are better left undisturbed." Each snippet felt like a key turned halfway in a lock, teasing her mind with the promise of discovery. She suppressed a grin, recalling how often people underestimated the value of careful observation. Ah, Bill, always so composed when life conspires against you, yet now you fidget like a schoolboy caught with a secret. Agatha silently noted the irony, enjoying the little amusement that came with spying without guilt. The visitor, by contrast, had a subtle air of confidence, though their fingers drummed nervously against the leather-bound folder on the desk, betraying unease beneath the polished exterior. Agatha's eyes flicked to the small photograph frame resting nearby. Bill had always kept family photos arranged meticulously, but now one in particular caught her attention, an image of a younger Bill with a man she didn't recognize. There was something in the lines of their smiles, the way they leaned toward each other, that suggested familiarity mixed with unresolved tension. The visitor's eyes drifted toward it for a fraction of a second, almost imperceptible, and then returned to Bill. That brief glance was a spark to Agatha's imagination, subtle but telling. The conversation continued, phrases like, "I never intended for this to resurface," and "It's been decades, yet it feels so immediate," floating through the air. Agatha's mind raced to assemble context. A long-standing grievance? A forgotten scandal? The mysterious visitor seemed to carry weight far heavier than their compact frames suggested. She tucked her notebook under her arm, metaphorical of course, and leaned slightly forward, drinking in the interplay with almost a scholarly delight. Bill rubbed his forehead, a faint sigh escaping his lips, while the visitor's composure wavered for only a heartbeat. Agatha noted the subtle conflict of loyalty and apprehension in his movements. Ah, dear Bill, torn between propriety and disclosure. How very human. Even in the midst of a mystery, she allowed herself a smirk at the predictable yet enduring reactions of her old acquaintance. Then came a fleeting remark that made her pause. If anyone else knew, the consequences would be unpredictable. That one line carried a weight that hung in the room like a storm cloud on the verge of breaking. Agatha's pulse quickened, the thrill of imminent revelation dancing along her spine. It was enough to suggest danger, yet not enough to frighten, a delicate balance she relished. The conversation wound down, the voices softening into an uneasy calm. Bill straightened, rubbing his hands over his trousers, while the visitor made a small, almost reluctant bow of acknowledgement. Agatha exhaled slowly, a mixture of amusement and anticipation settling over her. She had glimpsed the edges of a secret, enough to spark endless questions, yet not enough to spoil the suspense. As she stepped back from the hedge, the evening air felt cooler against her cheeks. The distant hum of village life continued undisturbed, completely oblivious to the unfolding drama behind closed doors. Agatha allowed herself a private chuckle. Observing without intervening was a skill, and tonight it had yielded enough breadcrumbs to feed her curiosity for hours. Yet she knew this was just the beginning. The visitor's presence had stirred more than just a conversation. Somewhere beneath that calm surface, a story waited, and Agatha was determined to uncover every layer.
Agatha lingered at the edge of the Wong garden, letting her eyes sweep across the familiar flower beds and neatly trimmed hedges. The moon cast silver light over the hydrangeas, lending a quiet, almost magical glow to the evening. Everything seemed in order at first glance, except for a small, incongruous detail that immediately caught her attention. A delicate silver thimble, polished to a high shine, rested among the autumn leaves. It was far too fine an object to have been casually dropped, and certainly not part of the usual garden clutter. Agatha crouched, her fingers hovering over it, feeling a thrill of discovery. She murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Who carries a thimble outdoors at twilight, and why leave it here, almost as if marking a path? She considered its placement carefully. Perhaps it had slipped from a pocket, or perhaps it had been left intentionally, a subtle signal to someone, or a careless mistake. Either way, it was a clue, and Agatha's mind hummed with possibilities. Her attention shifted to the soft earth beneath the rose bushes. There, a footprint disturbed the neatly raked soil, the shape of a small, delicate shoe pressed into the mud with unmistakable clarity. The sole carried an unusual pattern, swirls intertwined with geometric shapes, something that suggested either a bespoke design or a visitor not accustomed to the village terrain. Agatha knelt, inspecting it closely without touching, letting her imagination run freely. "Curious," she whispered. "Not Bill's shoes, not anyone I recognize, and certainly not the gardener's." She traced the footprint's direction with her gaze, noting that it led towards the back of the house, but then vanished near the old stone bench. The bench, long unused and slightly moss-covered, seemed an odd resting place. Yet Agatha noticed a faint scuff on the armrest, the kind made by deliberate, careful contact. Another subtle sign, tiny pieces of a puzzle that invited interpretation. She allowed herself a quiet smile, enjoying the intellectual thrill of piecing together fragments that others might overlook entirely. Glancing around, she spotted a garden tool slightly out of place, a small trowel, its handle polished smooth from use, lying at an odd angle near the lavender bed. Agatha raised her eyebrow. "Someone's been busy, or someone's pretending to be busy," she mused. The combination of thimble, footprint, and trowel created a narrative thread, teasing her mind to weave the story behind them. Each clue suggested intention, yet none revealed everything. A perfect scenario for Agatha's particular blend of curiosity and imagination. She allowed herself a moment to appreciate the quiet charm of the garden. Despite the underlying tension, the gentle scent of earth and flowers grounded her. It was a space where mysteries could unfold without alarming anyone, a subtle theater in which secrets performed under moonlight. Agatha's thoughts wandered to potential explanations. Perhaps a family heirloom had been delivered in haste. Perhaps the visitor was scouting for something lost or hidden. Or perhaps the items were distractions, meant to mislead. The possibilities were endless, and each theory delighted her in equal measure. Moving carefully, she examined the stone pathway, where another faint trace suggested a hurried step towards the back gate. She crouched to examine it, noting the direction and depth. Even the smallest depression in the earth told a story if one paid attention. Agatha's mind raced with conjecture. Who was this visitor really? How much did Bill know? Was the visitor's purpose benign or less so? The garden itself seemed to hum with secrets, whispering clues in the rustle of leaves and the moonlight's shimmer across stone and flower. Satisfied for the moment, but keen to observe further, Agatha straightened and took a slow step back. The evidence she had gathered, thimble, footprint, trowel, subtle scuffs, was fragmentary yet suggestive, enough to engage her curiosity and spur her next move. She tucked the mental notes away carefully, a private treasure of observation. There was no rush, no alarm, just a cozy, deliberate engagement with the puzzle before her. The night stretched on peacefully, yet beneath its calm surface, possibilities stirred, promising more revelations as the visitor's intentions gradually unfolded. Chapter 3. Whispers of the Past. Agatha's curiosity, never idle for long, led her back toward the side wing of the Wong estate. While she had been content observing from afar, the clues in the garden had sparked a new, more tactile line of inquiry, the possibility of discovering tangible remnants of the past. She knew Bill's estate well enough to recall the small library tucked just off the hallway, a room where family relics, photographs, and letters often found their quiet repose. Tonight it called to her in a whisper only she could hear. The door was slightly ajar, a forgotten consequence of the visitor's earlier arrival. Agatha slipped inside with the stealth of a practiced observer. The room smelled faintly of old paper and polished oak, comforting scents that carried a sense of history and continuity. She allowed her gaze to wander over the shelves, noting the meticulous order, the leather-bound volumes lined like soldiers on parade. Then her eyes fell on a small box, slightly hidden beneath a stack of ledgers. The lid was worn, edges softened by years of handling. Agatha knelt and lifted it gently, curiosity tingling in her fingers. Inside, she found letters tied with faded ribbon, their edges frayed but intact. The handwriting was elegant, fluid, and unmistakably old-fashioned, the ink faded to a gentle brown. Agatha traced a finger over the words, reading fragments aloud softly, though not loud enough to disturb anyone beyond the walls. "Dearest William, I trust you will forgive the delay. The matter must remain confidential. Until we meet again, all my affection." Each line hinted at private histories, old loyalties, and perhaps regrets too carefully contained. Her mind danced with possibilities. Who was this correspondent, and how did the letters connect to the visitor standing in Bill's house just hours ago? A photograph slit from the bundle, almost like it had been waiting for discovery. Agatha held it close to the lamplight, noting a young Bill with a woman whose face was partly obscured by shadow. The resemblance to the visitor was subtle but undeniable, a shared tilt of the chin, the same set of eyes that suggested both determination and caution. Agatha allowed herself a wry smile, enjoying the quiet thrill of historical sleuthing. She began to piece together a narrative, following threads that crossed decades. Letters spoke of debts owed, promises made, and incidents never fully explained. Photographs revealed gatherings with subtle tensions lurking beneath smiles, friendships that had frayed over time, and connections that hinted at alliances now shadowed by secrecy. Each artifact was a fragment, each fragment a doorway to curiosity, and Agatha's imagination eagerly paced the threshold. Her fingers lingered on one final letter, the seal slightly broken, the wax softened with age. It contained a brief sentence that leapt from the page. "Should circumstances change, seek her at the old garden gate. Trust no one else." Agatha raised her eyebrow. The old garden gate. Could it be connected to the odd footprint she had observed earlier? Or the peculiar placement of the thimble? The pieces began to align in her mind, though the picture remained incomplete, tantalizingly so. Agatha chuckled softly, aware of the absurdity of whispering to old paper, yet reveling in the intimacy it provided. "Ah, the lives we lead and the secrets we leave behind," she mused. The room felt warmer somehow under the glow of her lantern, and yet the atmosphere carried a subtle charge, a hint of tension that threaded through the coziness. The past had a way of pressing forward, and tonight it was knocking ever so softly at her imagination. Before leaving the room, she carefully returned the letters to their box, leaving everything exactly as it had been. Her eyes lingered once more on the photograph and the subtle shadows of history captured in silver nitrate. She knew she had glimpsed just the beginning of a story, a narrative that connected visitor, Bill, and the estate in ways yet to be revealed. With a satisfied sigh, she stepped back into the hallway, her mind alive with conjectures, theories, and quiet amusement. There was much to consider, and Agatha relished the slow, deliberate process of uncovering secrets hidden just beneath the surface.
Agatha returned to the village the following morning, her mind still occupied with the visitor and the fragments of history she had glimpsed in the Wong estate. The sun was low, casting a honeyed light over Carsley's cobblestone streets, and she moved at a deliberate pace, allowing herself to absorb the gentle bustle of the village. Shopkeepers arranged fresh blooms outside their windows, children's laughter bounced from corner to corner, and the distant clatter of breakfast dishes reminded her that life in Carsley continued unabated, even when secrets festered behind closed doors. She made her way first to Mrs. Pritchard's tiny tea shop, knowing the elderly gossipmonger would have noticed the arrival of the unusual visitor. The bell above the door tinkled, and the aroma of baking scones wrapped around her like a warm shawl. "Good morning, Mrs. Pritchard," Agatha began, choosing her words with care. "Have you seen anyone new around Bill Wong's house?" Mrs. Pritchard's eyes narrowed, her expression shifting into the delicate combination of curiosity and caution that Agatha had come to know well. "Well, yes, Miss Raisin. Came in late last night. I did notice someone. Strange type. Quiet. Not from around here, I'd wager. Didn't even nod at old Mr. Cleary as he passed." She paused, peering at Agatha like a cat assessing a new visitor. "Haven't seen them before, and I can't rightly say what business they have with Wong. People come and go, but this one, different, somehow." Agatha thanked her politely, filing away the detail about the visitor's lack of acknowledgement of Mr. Cleary. It was subtle, perhaps trivial, yet such small deviations often revealed much to someone trained to notice. She left the shop, feeling the familiar stirrings of excitement that accompanied observation. Curiosity, after all, thrived on ambiguity. A few steps farther, she encountered Mr. Hargreaves, the postman, who shook his head vigorously. "Visitor?" he asked. "Saw someone at the Wong house yesterday. Tall fellow, I'd say. Not quite right, though. Kept glancing over his shoulder, muttering to himself. Didn't see him touch anything outside, but he lingered at the gate longer than a gentleman should. Felt off." Agatha's brow lifted. Two villages, two slightly conflicting impressions. One quiet and discreet, the other nervous and fidgety. She tucked these observations into her mental notebook. One understated, one jittery. Perhaps the visitor adjusts their demeanor depending on who's watching, or maybe they're genuinely unpredictable. Her mind whirred with theories, each one plausible, each one teasing her further. Later, she strolled past the Wong estate again, under the pretense of collecting apples from the orchard at the rear of her own property. From this vantage, she could see the visitor's subtle gestures, a glance toward the garden, fingers tracing the edge of a windowsill, a brief pause as if listening to unseen sounds. Agatha's sharp eyes caught the tiny adjustments to posture, the micro-expressions that betrayed tension even beneath an otherwise calm exterior. Her thoughts wandered to motive. Why had this person arrived? What unfinished business might they hold with Bill Wong? The letters and photographs she had discovered yesterday suggested connections that were deeply personal, threads of family history entwined with grievances, promises, and perhaps even misdeeds. The visitor was not a casual acquaintance. Their presence carried weight, and Agatha's instinct, a finely tuned instrument after years of quiet observation, whispered caution. By the time she returned home for tea, Agatha had assembled a mosaic of clues, villagers' partial impressions, fleeting behaviors, fragments of history, and the subtle tension that lingered around the visitor like a second shadow. Each piece suggested intention, strategy, and careful concealment. Agatha poured herself a cup, sipping thoughtfully, letting the mild steam curl around her thoughts. She leaned back in her chair, allowing a private smile to cross her lips. Her mind worked like clockwork, turning over possibilities, discarding unlikely ones, and weighing each subtle nuance she had observed. The visitor's motive remained elusive, but the puzzle had enough edges for her to begin forming a shape. The slow, deliberate process of connecting threads, of teasing out secrets from gestures and whispers, was exactly the sort of challenge Agatha relished, and she knew, with a quiet certainty, that the coming days would reveal even more, if only she continued to watch, listen, and think.
Chapter 4. Unexpected Alliances. Agatha entered Bill Wong's kitchen with the familiar blend of confidence and and mild curiosity that seemed to accompany her wherever she went. Bill, already perched at the small wooden table with a cup of steaming tea, looked up as she crossed the threshold. "I hope you haven't come to interrogate me, Raisin," he said, his tone half serious, half exasperated. Agatha offered a playful smile, setting down her own cup. "Only to share observations, dear Bill, and perhaps to save you from wandering through the house worrying about every shadow." The kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread, its warmth mingling with the earthy aroma of tea leaves. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the tabletop. The atmosphere was cozy, deceptively calm, a stark contrast to the intrigue lingering in the air just beyond the walls. Agatha poured a little milk into her cup and took a measured sip, eyes twinkling with anticipation. "Now, let's discuss our mysterious visitor," she said. Bill leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I still can't decide whether they are a blessing or a complication," he muttered. Agatha chuckled softly, noting the faint lines of tension around his eyes. "Complication, most certainly, but the sort that offers interesting possibilities, and potentially a puzzle worth solving." She gestured towards the stack of notes she had taken the previous evening, her pen poised to capture fresh insights. They settled into a rhythm of discussion. Bill recounted what little he knew of the visitor's arrival, the snippets of conversation he had managed to extract, and the subtle unease that had accompanied each gesture. Agatha interjected occasionally with her own observations, the gloved hands, the deliberate pauses, the odd placement of objects in the garden, and Bill listened with an increasing sense of fascination, if not mild incredulity. "You notice the smallest details," he remarked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And that," Agatha said, leaning back with a satisfied air, "is why you and I make an excellent team. You provide the structure and discretion. I provide the chaos and deduction." Bill raised an eyebrow, though a reluctant smile softened his stern expression. Their banter, light and teasing, made the discussion feel less like an interrogation and more like the beginning of a genuine collaboration. They compared notes on the fragments of history she had discovered, letters, photographs, and the visitor's subtle cues. Each new insight prompted a volley of speculation, hypotheses bouncing back and forth. "Perhaps they are here to reconcile a past grievance," Bill suggested cautiously, stirring his tea. "Or perhaps they intend to unearth something that has been deliberately buried for decades." Agatha tapped her pen against the table, eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Or maybe both. That's the delicious part. You can never be entirely certain until the final pieces fall into place." Bill sipped his tea, contemplative, while Agatha sketched out a rough map of observed behavior, footsteps, and potential connections between clues. They discussed motive, opportunity, and subtle inconsistencies in the visitor's story. Each theory seemed plausible, yet none resolved the underlying question entirely. Agatha noted Bill's tension in his hands, the occasional narrowing of his eyes when a detail conflicted with what he had assumed. Observing him was as revealing as the visitor themselves. The way he processed information, filtered emotions, and weighed conjecture added a layer of insight she valued almost as much as the clues themselves. After a comfortable pause, punctuated only by the clink of teaspoons against porcelain, Agatha leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Bill, I think we can agree on one thing. This visitor's arrival is no coincidence. Everything else, the behavior, the subtle indications, the past entanglements, is merely a garnish on top of something far more deliberate." Bill nodded slowly, a faint crease forming between his brows. "Agreed. And with your unique observational skills, we might actually uncover it before it causes trouble." Agatha smiled, content with the small victory. In this warm kitchen, over steaming tea and the soft glow of afternoon light, a tentative alliance had formed. They were no longer solitary observers, but partners in a quiet, unfolding investigation. The conversation had laid the foundation, their shared curiosity, combined wit and seriousness, and complementary skills promised that, together, they might navigate the visitor's hidden motives and the mysteries of the Wong estate with precision, patience, and just a touch of amusement. Agatha and Bill stepped quietly out into the crisp late afternoon air, the sun dipping low behind Carsley's gentle hills. Their goal was simple, in theory: follow the visitors' trail without being seen, trace their movements, and discover anything that might clarify intentions. In practice, it required patience, observation, and a shared understanding of subtlety that they had cultivated over years of acquaintance. "Notice anything?" Bill asked, his eyes scanning the lane ahead, fingers tapping lightly on the strap of his satchel. Agatha, adjusting her scarf against the cool breeze, shook her head with mock seriousness. "Only that someone has a talent for leaving breadcrumbs that aren't quite breadcrumbs." Her tone hinted at amusement, though her gaze remained sharp, sweeping the garden walls, hedges, and side paths for any clue. Their first stop was the narrow lane behind the Wong estate, where autumn leaves formed a delicate mosaic across cobblestones. Agatha crouched slightly, pointing to a faint impression on the ground. A shoe mark, its unusual sole pattern immediately familiar from her previous observations in the garden. "Ah," she whispered, "our friend has been careful, but even careful steps leave a story." Bill nodded, noting the same detail with the analytical precision that characterized his every observation. The trail led them past familiar cottages, where curtains flickered with the presence of dinner preparations and evening chatter. Agatha's eyes caught subtle signs: a disturbed flower pot here, a slightly ajar gate there, all hinting at a visitor who moved cautiously but left unintentional marks. She shared each discovery with Bill, who listened attentively, occasionally arching an eyebrow or murmuring agreement. The rhythm of their teamwork, equal parts humor and diligence, made the investigation feel both engaging and comfortable. At the village green, Agatha paused. "Notice the footprints leading toward the old mill path," she said softly. The prints were shallower here, as though the visitor had quickened their pace or adjusted for softer ground. Agatha traced them with her gaze, imagining the cautious steps taken moments before. "There's intention in every hesitation," she added, half to herself. Bill smiled faintly at her phrasing, understanding both the observation and the delight she derived from it. As they continued, they passed a small hedge that bordered the florist's shop. A note, barely visible under the edge of a fallen leaf, caught Agatha's attention. She bent and retrieved it carefully, reading the terse, typed words: "Meet at dusk, old garden gate. Trust no one else." She glanced at Bill, whose expression had tightened with recognition. "Well," she said quietly, "our visitor seems to favor secrecy even in correspondence." The note was a direct, tangible connection to the previous day's letters and photographs, confirming the careful orchestration behind every move. They moved on, following subtle signs: a scuff on the cobblestones, a trail of displaced leaves, a faint shadow passing behind a window. Each detail, while minor, combined into a larger pattern, a story whispered across familiar streets. Agatha's mind, ever inventive, considered multiple scenarios. A family dispute revived, a secret heirloom recovered, or perhaps a misdirected reconciliation. The possibilities danced like firelight, captivating her without overwhelming the calm and the evening. By the time they returned to the Wong estate, twilight had settled fully over Carsley. The village lights glimmered softly, windows glowing warmly against the deepening dusk. Agatha and Bill paused at the gate, reflecting on their findings. Though the trail had yielded no dramatic confrontation, it had revealed intention, strategy, and subtle behavior patterns that would prove invaluable in understanding the visitor's purpose. Agatha allowed herself a small smile, feeling the satisfaction of discovery without urgency. Bill's gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, the shared understanding of partnership and mutual respect hung between them. The mystery remained, teasing and incomplete, yet the trail they had followed had opened new avenues of insight. Tonight, they had walked together, observed together, and pieced together fragments of a story that promised more revelations with each careful step. Chapter 5.
The visitor's secret. The evening had settled into a hushed quiet, the Wong estate bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. Agatha stepped lightly across the polished wooden floors of the drawing room, where Bill had arranged 2 chairs near the hearth. The fire's flickering warmth painted shifting shadows on the walls, creating an intimate, almost confessional atmosphere. The visitor, seated opposite them, shifted uneasily, fingers drumming lightly on the armrest, eyes flicking between Agatha and Bill as if seeking both judgment and reassurance. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us," Bill began, his voice calm yet measured. The visitor swallowed, nodding once before replying, their tone hesitant, almost tentative. "I suppose it is time someone explained, though I cannot tell everything. Not yet." Agatha leaned forward slightly, a small smile tugging at her lips, her eyes attentive to every micro-expression. "Partial truths often reveal more than full confessions," she murmured softly, more to herself than to anyone else, savoring the careful dance of revelation. The visitor took a deep breath, shoulders tensing as they began. I knew Bill many years ago, though you would not recognize me from those days. There were promises and disagreements, things left unresolved. I came tonight to clarify, perhaps even to make amends, though I fear it may not be enough." Their eyes flicked down at their hands, then back to Bill, who nodded slowly, processing both the words and the hesitation between them. Agatha's gaze roamed, noting the subtle cues, the twitch of a jaw, the brief clenching of hands, the occasional avoidance of direct eye contact. Each movement carried weight, a story layered beneath the spoken words. She took mental notes, letting her imagination reconstruct scenarios, motives, and emotional undercurrents. The visitor's partial honesty suggested sincerity, yet the careful withholding hinted at a deeper agenda. Curiosity prickled at her awareness. What remained unspoken and why? Bill's voice softened, breaking a brief silence. "You don't need to recount every detail tonight. Start with what you can share and we'll work from there." The visitor nodded, exhaling slowly. "It began with an old disagreement involving family matters and miscommunications. I left abruptly, believing it best to stay away, but news reached me, and I realized that unresolved issues cannot simply vanish. I came here seeking understanding, perhaps even to make amends, though I fear it may not be enough." Their eyes flicked down at their hands, then back to Bill, who nodded slowly, processing both the words and the hesitation between them. Agatha's mind raced, piecing together connections between this confession and the letters, photographs, and small garden clues she had observed. Each element gained new significance under the light of the visitor's words. The carefully orchestrated gestures, the subtle footprints, even the cryptic note discovered days earlier, all now fit within a framework that suggested a complex, layered purpose. Yet uncertainty lingered, teasing the edges of her perception. The visitor's voice faltered briefly, a shadow of guilt passing across their face. "I cannot say everything. Some matters are delicate and potentially painful if revealed too soon, but I assure you, my intentions are not malevolent. I seek only to address what should have been addressed long ago." Bill's expression softened, a mixture of relief and residual wariness evident. He leaned back, contemplating the partial truth laid before them. Agatha, quietly absorbing the scene, allowed herself a moment of reflection. The tension remained, yet the warmth of honesty, however incomplete, provided a subtle reassurance. The flickering candlelight accentuated the complexity of human motives, illuminating the fragile intersections of past mistakes, personal growth, and the pursuit of understanding. Even partial confessions could serve as catalysts for resolution, she thought, and tonight was proof. As the visitors settled into a quieter posture, the three of them sat in contemplative silence, the fire crackling softly. Agatha's eyes sparkled with curiosity, eager to see how this revelation would ripple through the evening's unfolding narrative. The partial truth had opened a window, just wide enough to glimpse the shape of hidden stories, yet the full panorama remained tantalizingly out of reach.
After the visitor's partial confession, the drawing room settled into an uneasy quiet. Agatha remained seated, sipping her tea,
while Bill retreated momentarily to the hallway to check on the study. The firelight flickered against the walls, casting elongated shadows that seemed to twist and move as if carrying secrets of their own. Agatha's eyes, ever watchful, followed each subtle movement, her curiosity piqued by the interplay of light and shadow. A soft creak from the corridor drew her attention. She froze mid-sip, listening intently. The house was old. These sounds were common, but the timing coincided with the faint shuffle, almost like a cautious footstep. Agatha's mind raced, considering possibilities. The visitor returning quietly to retrieve something, Bill moving silently, or perhaps another presence entirely. She set down her cup gently, careful not to disturb the delicate atmosphere, and arose to investigate. As she stepped into the hallway, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision, just beyond the doorway to the library. Agatha paused, her instincts sharpening. She moved slowly, following the shadow's subtle drift along the polished floor. Her footsteps were deliberate but soft, blending with the house's natural creaks. The visitor's earlier nervous gestures replayed in her mind, and she considered whether these new anomalies were connected to their intentions or perhaps entirely unrelated misdirections. A soft creak from the far end of the hall drew her attention. She froze mid-sip, listening intently. The house was old. These sounds were common, but the timing coincided with a faint shuffle, almost like a cautious footstep. Agatha's mind raced, considering possibilities. The visitor returning quietly to retrieve something, Bill moving silently, or perhaps another presence entirely. She set down her cup gently, careful not to disturb the delicate atmosphere, and arose to investigate. As she stepped into the hallway, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision, just beyond the doorway to the library. Agatha paused, her instincts sharpening. She moved slowly, following the shadow's subtle drift along the polished floor. Her footsteps were deliberate but soft, blending with the house's natural creaks. The visitor's earlier nervous gestures replayed in her mind, and she considered whether these new anomalies were connected to their intentions or perhaps entirely unrelated misdirections. A soft creak from the far end of the hall drew her attention. She froze mid-sip, listening intently. The house was old. These sounds were common, but the timing coincided with the faint shuffle, almost like a cautious footstep. Agatha's mind raced, considering possibilities, the visitor returning quietly to retrieve something, Bill moving silently, or perhaps another presence entirely. She set down her cup gently, careful not to disturb the delicate atmosphere, and arose to investigate. As she stepped into the hallway, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision, just beyond the doorway to the library. Agatha paused, her instincts sharpening. She moved slowly, following the shadow's subtle drift along the polished floor. Her footsteps were deliberate but soft, blending with the house's natural creaks. The visitor's earlier nervous gestures replayed in her mind, and she considered whether these new anomalies were connected to their intentions or perhaps entirely unrelated misdirections. A soft creak from the far end of the hall drew her attention. She froze mid-sip, listening intently. The house was old. These sounds were common, but the timing coincided with the faint shuffle, almost like a cautious footstep. Agatha's mind raced, considering possibilities, the visitor returning quietly to retrieve something, Bill moving silently, or perhaps another presence entirely. She set down her cup gently, tracing her fingers along the crease. She froze mid-sip and listened intently. The house was old, but the timing coincided with the faint shuffle. Agatha's mind raced, considering possibilities, the visitor returning quietly to retrieve something, Bill moving silently, or perhaps another presence entirely. She set down her cup gently, careful not to disturb the delicate atmosphere, and arose to investigate. Agatha continued her careful inspection, tiptoeing past the drawing room's threshold and peering into the study. Papers were stacked neatly, but one folder was slightly out of alignment, its edge catching the light. She reached out just enough to adjust it, only to notice beneath the stack a faint smudge on the desk, something that suggested hurried handling. Her mind cataloged the subtle signs: movement, disturbance, shadow. Each element reinforced the sense that the visitor's story was incomplete,
and that the house itself seemed to hum with hidden narratives waiting to be uncovered. A distant thump, like a loose shutter, echoed through the hall, causing her to glance upward. The visitor had promised honesty, but Agatha suspected more layers remained hidden, each step in the house a potential clue. Her imagination conjured scenarios that ranged from the innocuous, a misplaced object, a nervous gesture, to the deliberately concealed, secrets kept behind locked doors, intentions disguised by polite manners. The thrill of possibility coursed through her, mingled with the warmth of the firelight and the faint aroma of evening tea. By the time Bill returned from the study, Agatha had retraced her path, observed every subtle shadow, and catalogued inconsistencies with her usual meticulous care. She met his eyes and offered a small, knowing smile, one that suggested she had already begun piecing together unseen patterns. The house, quiet once more except for the soft crackle of the fire, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next revelation to unfold. Agatha's mind buzzed with anticipation, the tension gentle yet persistent, like the tug of a story waiting to be told. Tonight, the shadows had spoken in their own silent language, hinting at motives unvoiced and truths still concealed. Agatha knew that every flicker, every whisper, brought them closer to understanding the visitor's complex puzzle, and she relished the slow, deliberate unraveling of a secret only partially revealed.
Chapter 6. A Twist in the Tale. The morning mist clung to Carsley like a delicate veil as Agatha approached the Wong estate, her mind still buzzing from the previous night's shadows and partial confessions. Bill was already outside, pacing near the garden gate, his expression a mixture of concentration and mild frustration. "I didn't expect to find anything new this morning," he said without looking up, "but I've stumbled across something that might change everything." Agatha arched an eyebrow, intrigued. "Do tell," she replied, her voice smooth but brimming with curiosity. Bill led her to the study, where a small, unassuming envelope had been tucked beneath the edge of a heavy book. He held it out carefully. "Found this slipped under the door last night," he explained. Agatha's eyes sparkled with anticipation as she reached for it. The envelope was unmarked, save for a faint smudge of wax that suggested hurried sealing. She carefully opened it, revealing a letter typed in a crisp, unfamiliar hand. Her eyes scanned the contents quickly, and a flicker of surprise crossed her features. "Well," she murmured, leaning back, "this complicates matters considerably." Bill frowned. "Complicates? How?" Agatha tapped the letter against her fingers thoughtfully. "It contradicts what we understood about the visitor's history with your family. According to this, their motives might not be solely reconciliation or clarification." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air like an unlit fuse. The letter hinted at unresolved financial matters, miscommunicated intentions, and an outside party whose involvement neither she nor Bill had considered. Agatha's mind raced as she cross-referenced the contents with what they had observed. Subtle gestures, partially revealed secrets, and the visitor's careful, measured behavior. Each clue now took on a new shade of meaning, suggesting that the visitor's purpose might extend beyond personal reconciliation. Bill ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. "So all this time we've assumed one thing, and it turns out—" He left the sentence unfinished, the unspoken possibility hanging ominously. Agatha smiled wryly, sensing his tension but savoring the invigorating challenge. "Turns out," she finished for him, "that mysteries rarely adhere to our neat expectations, and when they do, you know something more complicated is just waiting around the corner." They spent the next hour carefully dissecting the letter, comparing each line to known details, the visitor's past encounters, village whispers, and even the subtle inconsistencies in behavior Agatha had catalogued over the previous days. Every contradiction offered a tantalizing glimpse into motives layered like sheets of translucent paper, some obscuring truths,
others hinting at the wider picture. Agatha jotted notes, her handwriting neat but rapid, capturing connections that seemed invisible to anyone else. As they worked, Agatha's wit surfaced in quiet commentary. "I must say, Bill," she tilted her head with mock severity, "you do have a knack for underestimating the subtle genius of a mysterious visitor." Bill smiled faintly, a hint of warmth softening his otherwise serious demeanor. "And you have a penchant for reading far too much into shadows," he replied, though the underlying approval in his tone was unmistakable. By mid-morning they had reached a tentative conclusion. The visitor's agenda was more complex than initially believed, interweaving personal history, village dynamics, and possibly external pressures. Agatha leaned back in her chair, satisfied with the progress, yet aware that this twist demanded renewed vigilance. "It seems," she said thoughtfully, "that we have only glimpsed the outer edge of this story. There are layers yet to uncover, and we must tread carefully to ensure each revelation aligns with reality, not assumption." Bill nodded, his eyes thoughtful but resolute. The unexpected turn had shifted the investigation, bringing fresh energy and a renewed sense of purpose. For Agatha, it was the perfect balance: suspense that kept the mind active, warmth from shared endeavor, and the promise that the visitor's true intentions were waiting to be revealed, piece by intriguing piece. As they prepared to follow the next lead, the air between them crackled with anticipation, an electric mix of curiosity, strategy, and the cozy satisfaction of unraveling a puzzle even when the pieces refused to fit neatly. The day promised discoveries, and the first unexpected turn had ensured that the path ahead would be anything but predictable.
Agatha and Bill settled at the study table, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, illuminating scattered notes, photographs, and the visitor's cryptic letter. The morning mist had burned off, leaving the village bathed in a calm, golden light that contrasted with the mental storm of deductions forming in their heads. Agatha tapped her pen against a sheet of paper, considering the strands of information they had gathered over the past several days. "It's like a jigsaw puzzle," she murmured, "except someone seems determined to mix a few pieces from a completely different set." Bill leaned over the table, scrutinizing the notes. "We have the visitor's movements, the partial confession, and that unexpected letter. There are overlaps, but some elements contradict each other." Agatha smiled knowingly. "Contradictions are precisely the spices that make mysteries worthwhile. Now, observe." She pointed to a series of photographs pinned on the corkboard. "Notice how the visitor's gestures in these images correspond to the footprints and scuffed leaves we traced earlier. Each one tells a story we nearly overlooked." They began connecting patterns. A subtle repetition of gloved hands in the photographs mirrored the visitor's careful placement of objects in the garden. The wording of letters hinted at more than one possible motive, and small discrepancies in timing suggested deliberate misdirection. Agatha traced the connections with her finger, her eyes lighting up with each realization. "See here? The note mentioning the garden gate aligns with the shadow movements we observed last night. This is no coincidence." Bill nodded, adjusting his spectacles as he followed her logic. "And the visitor's hesitation during the confession, when speaking of past grievances, it coincides with the times they passed through the hallway without entering the study. They were deliberate pauses, not just nervous behavior." Agatha grinned. "Exactly. Every hesitation, every shadow, every softly dropped footstep has meaning, and those meanings form a map if one can only decipher it." The two of them worked in harmony, their thoughts interweaving like the threads of a finely woven tapestry. Agatha's wit and intuition complemented Bill's analytical rigor. She suggested connections based on intuition, and he verified them against the evidence with methodical precision. The study, cluttered with scattered papers and half-empty teacups, became a war room of sorts.
the calm mooning light giving the proceedings a gentle, almost cozy ambience, despite the tension simmering beneath. Agatha paused to examine an envelope she had previously overlooked, tucked behind a stack of photographs. Inside were tickets to an event dated months ago. An invitation to a family gathering, she realized, had never been mentioned in any of the visitors' accounts. "Interesting," she said softly. "This reveals two things. One, the visitor had long-standing connections to your family we weren't aware of. And two, some details have been deliberately concealed." Bill's expression darkened thoughtfully. "So even our current understanding is incomplete. There's more than one layer of intention here." They began arranging the clues into a tentative timeline, each observation a piece of the puzzle, each inconsistency a hint toward a deeper truth. Agatha's mind danced between playful speculation and focused analysis, imagining the visitor's thought process while noting the subtle impact on Bill's reactions. The interplay of personalities, evidence, and village familiarity created a complex, satisfying intellectual challenge. By late morning, they leaned back in their chairs, surveying the emerging picture. The puzzle pieces had begun to form recognizable shapes, revealing motives, partial truths, and subtle deceptions. Agatha's eyes sparkled with the satisfaction of insight, while Bill allowed himself a small smile at the clarity beginning to emerge. Yet the full picture remained tantalizingly incomplete. Agatha tapped her pen against the table once more. "We're close, Bill. Each piece is falling into place, but there's still a final edge missing. The one piece that will show us the complete shape of this visitor's intentions. And when that piece appears," she trailed off, eyes twinkling. Bill's glance met hers, silent acknowledgment passing between them. The game was far from over, yet the joy of deduction, the thrill of discovery, and the comforting cadence of shared reasoning made the pursuit irresistible.
Chapter 7. Confrontation and Clarity. The late afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the lace curtains of the drawing room, casting warm patterns across the polished wooden floor. Agatha sat in her favorite chair, fingers lightly drumming on the armrest, while Bill stood nearby, arms crossed, maintaining his usual composed demeanor. The visitor, seated opposite them, shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between Agatha's keen gaze and Bill's steady presence. It was time for clarity, for truths to surface fully. Agatha leaned forward, her expression a blend of curiosity and gentle insistence. "Now, we've traced footsteps, observed shadows, and uncovered letters," she said, her tone calm yet unwavering. "I think it's only fair we understand precisely why you've come to Carsley and why so much has been left unsaid until now." The visitor swallowed, fingers twisting the edge of a sleeve nervously, before exhaling and meeting her eyes. I suppose it's time," the visitor admitted. "What I didn't reveal before involves more than personal grievances. There were misunderstandings, yes, but also matters of inheritance, decisions made long ago that affected your family, Bill." Bill's eyebrows knitted together. "Go on," he said quietly, his voice steady but laced with anticipation. Agatha's eyes twinkled with interest, sensing the intricate dance about to unfold. The visitor paused, gathering composure. "Years ago, certain assets were mismanaged," they explained. "Decisions made in haste or without full consultation. I was part of that process, perhaps too eager, perhaps not entirely careful. It caused rifts, confusion, and unresolved issues that continued long after I left." Their gaze flicked toward Bill, who nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the confession. Agatha, meanwhile, noted subtle signs: hesitation in speech, slight tension in shoulders, fleeting expressions of guilt, small cues that spoke volumes. "So," Agatha interjected lightly, "you admit involvement, yet your actions now suggest an attempt to repair rather than exploit." The visitor's lips curved faintly. "Exactly. I came to clarify, to make amends where possible, though I cannot undo the past entirely." Agatha's lips quirked in amusement. "A noble aim, though one that required a rather dramatic entrance and some theatrical shadows, if I may say. Bill's lips twitched, betraying his amusement despite the serious nature of the discussion. The conversation unfolded carefully, revealing layers bit by bit. Agatha's questions were precise but gentle, coaxing explanations while allowing the visitor to maintain dignity. Each answer resolved a previous ambiguity: why certain letters were cryptic, why movements in the garden seemed deliberate, and why partial truths had been shared before. The visitor's narrative aligned with previously observed clues, creating a coherent story that bridged past mistakes with present intentions. At one point, a soft sigh escaped the visitor, almost unnoticed, but Agatha caught it immediately. "You care about how this looks, don't you?" she said with a teasing tone. The visitor's cheeks colored slightly. "I do," they admitted. "I wished to be honest without causing unnecessary hurt, though I feared honesty might come too late." Agatha nodded, appreciating the delicate balance between moral responsibility and personal fear. By the time the sunlight had shifted toward the western window, casting long golden beams across the room, the conversation had clarified nearly all lingering uncertainties. The visitor's motives, while complex, were rooted in accountability and a desire for reconciliation. Agatha felt a satisfying sense of resolution, knowing that the pieces, conflicting behaviors, cryptic letters, and shadowed movements, finally made coherent sense. Bill leaned back, a quiet exhale escaping him. "I understand now," he said softly. Agatha smiled, a glint of amusement in her eyes. "And so do we," she said, her voice warm. "But I must say, the suspense, the shadows, the mysteries, they did make the evening rather enjoyable." The visitor chuckled, the tension easing noticeably. In that moment, the room was filled with gentle relief, the cozy warmth of understanding, and the lingering thrill of having witnessed a carefully guarded truth finally emerge.
As the visitor's confession settled into the warm glow of the drawing room, Agatha and Bill took a moment to reflect. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, the soft crackle punctuating the silence like punctuation marks in their thoughts. Agatha leaned back in her chair, fingers laced over her lap, savoring the clarity that had finally emerged from layers of secrecy and subtle deception. "Well," she began, her tone thoughtful but lightly amused, "it seems everything we observed, the shadows, the unusual gestures, the half-spoken truths, all align now. The visitor's past involvement, the garden clues, even the mysterious letters, they all form a coherent narrative." She tilted her head, eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of piecing together the intricate puzzle. Bill nodded slowly, scanning the room as if replaying each prior day's events in his mind. "Indeed," he said, voice calm but edged with relief. "I can see now how each element fits. The partial confession, the inconsistencies we noted, and the visitor's careful movements. Everything had a reason, a purpose. And yet, I must admit," he added, a faint smile tugging at his lips, "I didn't anticipate some of the theatrical shadows." Agatha chuckled softly, the sound blending with the fire's gentle crackle. "Ah, suspense does have its own charm, even when we are the ones creating it ourselves, knowingly or not." Together they began summarizing the visitor's story, tracing each thread from past grievances to present intentions. Agatha's mind danced through the timeline, years of miscommunication, unresolved family disputes, carefully concealed motives, and the cautious, deliberate steps the visitor had taken to reconcile and clarify. Each revelation that had initially seemed disconnected now fell neatly into place, forming a satisfying mosaic of understanding. Bill gestured toward the photographs and letters spread across the table. Even the smallest details, the placement of objects in the garden, the subtle gestures in photographs, each contributed to the narrative. Observing them in isolation gave a sense of mystery, but together they make perfect sense. Agatha nodded, appreciating the subtlety.
"It's remarkable," she said, "how much a careful eye can uncover, and yet how much still remains hidden until patience and perspective reveal the truth." The visitor, now visibly relaxed, leaned back in their chair, a small, genuine smile replacing the earlier tension. "I'm grateful," they said softly. "I feared coming here would reopen old wounds rather than heal them, but your patience and insight have made understanding possible." Agatha inclined her head, her expression warm. "That is the beauty of unraveling a mystery," she replied. "It requires care, observation, and a willingness to see beyond what is immediately apparent." Even as clarity settled over the room, Agatha noticed minor threads that remained unresolved: a forgotten detail in the garden, a fleeting glance from the visitor that hinted at further complexities, and the ever-present rhythm of village life that might one day intersect with these events again. She filed these observations mentally, a gentle reminder that mysteries never entirely disappear. They merely wait for the right moment to resurface. Bill stood and stretched, glancing around the cozy drawing room. "Well," he said, "I think we've achieved what we came here to do: clarity, understanding, and a measure of reconciliation." Agatha smiled, rising as well, her eyes glinting with both amusement and satisfaction. "Indeed," she agreed, "and yet the shadows and secrets we've unraveled today make life in Carsley all the more charming and intriguingly unpredictable." The visitor rose as well, gratitude evident in their posture. As they exchanged farewells, the sense of closure was accompanied by a gentle warmth, a cozy satisfaction that comes from seeing tangled stories untangle, yet leaving just enough nuance to remind one that life, like mystery, is never completely without intrigue. Agatha lingered for a moment, watching the interplay of light and shadow on the walls, a soft smile on her lips, knowing that one story had concluded, that the next adventure was always just around the corner.
Chapter 8. Resolution and Reflection. The morning sun spilled gently over Carsley, bathing the village in soft golden light that made the cobblestones gleam and the hedges sparkle with dew. Agatha strolled at her usual pace, her mind replaying the past week's events with the meticulous attention of someone accustomed to noticing the smallest details. Despite the lingering threads of mystery, there was a comforting sense of closure in the air. The streets, lined with familiar cottages and cheerful shop fronts, felt more like home than ever. Agatha paused at Mrs. Bloxby's bakery, inhaling the comforting aroma of freshly baked scones. The warm smell mingled with the crisp morning air, and she allowed herself a small smile. "Even the most tangled secrets can be unraveled over a cup of tea," she murmured, glancing at the display of pastries that seemed to wink at her conspiratorially. She bought a scone and a pot of Earl Grey, finding a bench nearby where the sunlight pooled in a perfect patch. As she nibbled delicately, her thoughts wandered back to the visitor's confession and Bill's quiet patience. Agatha couldn't help but notice the subtle humor in human behavior, how people could conceal truths with such theatrical flair, and yet, in the end, reveal themselves in gestures far more telling than words. The village's gentle hum, chatter of shopkeepers, distant laughter of children, the soft clip-clop of a passing horse provided a serene soundtrack to her reflection. She chuckled softly, recalling the shadows in the hall, the carefully placed clues in the garden, and Bill's brief, rare moments of amusement at her witticisms. Humans, she mused, are delightful in their complexity, and yet predictably so in the ways they betray their own intentions, even without realizing it. The thought warmed her. Not just the satisfaction of solving a puzzle, but the recognition of the rich tapestry of personalities that made Carsley charmingly unpredictable. Passing the village square, Agatha noticed the usual group of gossiping neighbors clustered near the fountain. Their chatter was harmless, filled with theories about everything from missing garden tools to the latest bout of village drama. She paused to exchange a few words, offering subtle hints without giving away any details. The interactions were light-hearted, a reminder that life in Carsley continued in its gentle rhythm even as mysteries came and went. Agatha's path led her to the small riverside path she often frequented when contemplation was required. The water moved in soft, steady ripples, reflecting the early sunlight. She seated herself on a familiar bench, the one with slightly chipped paint and a view of the willow trees swaying lazily above the river. Here, she allowed herself to reflect more deeply, not only on the visitor and the resolved tensions, but also on her own observations, instincts, and patience. Every step of the investigation had reinforced her sense of curiosity, humor, and appreciation for the subtleties of human behavior. She smiled to herself, imagining Bill analyzing the visitor's motives with his usual calm rigor, and then herself darting about, following shadows, scrutinizing letters, and noting the tiniest inconsistencies. The balance of logic and intuition had carried them to understanding, but the journey had been as delightful as the resolution. Agatha felt a gentle pride in her own cleverness, tempered with humor at the occasional mishap or misjudgment along the way. As the morning waned into early afternoon, the village settled into a quiet lull. Agatha watched a small boat drift lazily along the river, the gentle splash of oars blending with the soft rustling of leaves. Here, in these quiet moments, the chaos of mystery had been replaced by calm reflection. The story had reached its conclusion, yet the echoes of intrigue lingered, playful and comforting. Agatha allowed herself one final chuckle, noting the minor unresolved curiosities that hinted life and mystery would continue to charm and surprise her in Carsley. With the warmth of the sun and a scone safely finished, Agatha arose, ready to return home. She carried with her the satisfaction of resolution, the joy of observation, and the quiet amusement that came from knowing that even in a peaceful village there was always another puzzle just waiting to be discovered.
The late afternoon sun cast a soft glow over Carsley, turning rooftops golden and making the ivy along the cottages shimmer faintly. Agatha walked beside Bill along the quiet lane leading back from the Wong estate, their pace unhurried, each step punctuated by the gentle rhythm of village life. There was no immediate urgency, no pressing mystery, only the comforting calm of resolution and the subtle thrill of anticipation for what might come next. Agatha glanced at Bill, noting the faint relaxation in his usually composed posture. "Well," she said lightly, "I must admit, today's events have been more enlightening than the village gossip over Mrs. Bloxby's tea cakes." Bill allowed himself a small, wry smile. "Enlightening indeed," he agreed, "and perhaps a little theatrical. But it seems the visitor's story has reached its proper conclusion." Agatha's lips curved into a grin. "Proper, yes, but never without a touch of suspense. One must keep life interesting, even in a village this cozy." They strolled in companionable silence for a moment, observing the simple pleasures of Carsley, a cat lazily stretching along a sunlit wall, the soft clatter of a wheelbarrow in a neighbor's garden, children chasing one another in the distance. Agatha reflected on the recent events, the shadows in the hall, the subtle clues in the garden, the visitor's layered confession. Each memory brought a gentle smile, a sense of accomplishment, and the quiet satisfaction of unraveling a puzzle without disrupting the rhythm of village life. Bill cleared his throat softly. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what other stories lie hidden behind closed doors in Carsley? Secrets that might surface tomorrow or next week?" Agatha laughed quietly, the sound light and teasing. "Oh, Bill, I rather suspect there is always something waiting to be discovered. Some mislaid letter, an unnoticed glance, a curious visitor who disrupts the calm just enough to keep us guessing." She paused, letting the thought linger. "And isn't that part of the charm?" They reached a small bench beneath an old oak tree overlooking the village square. The sun slanted through the branches, creating a lattice of light and shadow across the cobblestones. Agatha sat, tucking her hands in her lap, and Bill joined her, both enjoying the simple serenity. "I dare say," Agatha continued, "that while this mystery has been resolved, we have only glimpsed the tip of the iceberg. Life in Carsley has a way of sprinkling surprises when least expected." Bill nodded, gazing toward the horizon where the sun touched the distant hills. "Indeed,
And it seems we work well together in uncovering them. Agatha's eyes twinkled. Yes, a fine partnership, combining methodical reasoning with, shall we say, charming intuition. Bill raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on his lips. Charming intuition, of course, essential to the village's investigative needs. The conversation drifted easily into comfortable silence, punctuated by occasional observations of village life, a neighbor watering flowers, a dog trotting along the lane, a door creaking gently in the wind. Agatha allowed herself to savor the quiet, reflecting on her own growth, the patience cultivated, the joy of seeing mysteries unfold, and the simple pleasure of companionship in both the calm and suspenseful moments. Finally, Agatha rose from the bench, dusting off her coat. "Well, Bill," she said, her voice tinged with warmth, "I suppose we should let the village continue its daily rhythm, but I do hope you keep an eye out for the next curious occurrence. Something tells me it won't be long before another puzzle emerges." Bill smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Agreed, and when it does, we shall be ready." As they walked back toward the heart of Carsley, the sun dipping lower in the sky, Agatha's thoughts lingered on both the resolved mystery and the promise of future adventures. There was a sense of completeness, yet the gentle hum of curiosity remained alive. For in a village like Carsley, life and mystery intertwined seamlessly, offering comfort, amusement, and the quiet assurance that the next story was always just around the corner.